Hey there folks, welcome to our YouTube channel. Let's get started.
Jihan opened the door and greeted his guest with a friendly smile. The middle-aged man came into the house and said that it seemed I knew he would come and was waiting for him. Jihan replied that everything was getting really big and crowded, so he expected the government would definitely send someone soon. Seong is surprised to see their guest, who turns out to be the head of the administrative office of the battle.net in South Korea, Park Yoon-sik. Park Yoon-sik kindly greeted Seong. Jihan smiles happily at the man's arrival because he remembers the government bureau stopped coming after Seong left, but no one cares more about Jihan and Seong than Park Yoon-sik. So Jihan thought he should quickly manage the future well and take everything they need now. They immediately invited Park Yoon-sik to sit down and serve tea. After a while, the middle-aged man said that the live stream was too rough, but he was quite enjoying it. Thanks to that, the government can come to a conclusion in several ways. The conclusion was, the Korean government did not bring back the king's swords. But Mr. Park added that they couldn't blatantly show this kind of decision to everyone, especially since this matter happened right before the Korean War against Japan. Feeling that Mr. Park was too long-winded, finally, Jihan interrupted and asked the grown man to stop the pleasantries because he knew that Mr. Park Yoon-sik had come to their place to ask them to return the Sword Palace to the government. Once Mr. Park and the government accept it, it will be an official acknowledgement that the king's swords will not return to Korea. Instantly, Mr. Park Yoon-sik was stunned to hear Jihan's words because the young man's assessment was right in Mr. Park's eyes. Mr. Park wonders if Jihan is the same tramp as before. Mr. Park Yoon-sik still remembers well a while ago when he visited and saw Jihan's bum-like appearance, who was lost in alcohol and gambling. Mr. Park Yoon-sik then said that what Jihan said was true, but since they had not completely given up on the return of the king's swords, Mr. Park's side wanted to put the palace swords under consignment management instead of putting them under the name of the government. Consignment management operates an organization, group, or company by entrusting responsibility to others. That is indeed a difficult term. Jihan realized that Mr. Park Yoon-sik had come up with a very good idea. Jihan asks if they will manage it until the owner returns. Mr. Park confirms this and explains that they want Jihan and Seong to stay at Swords Palace. Then Mr. Park Yoon-sik took out some paper contract documents for Jihan and Seong to check. Mr. Park Yoon-sik said that the terms of this agreement must be beneficial to both parties, so he asked the two youths before him to read the letter carefully. Jihan knew they must be very careful in this matter considering the situation was so dire. Jihan had thought of giving everything to the government, so it would be better for the two of them to be able to benefit on the side. Then Jihan put down the document and said that he really understood the government's position. But before signing the contract, there is one thing he wants to ask from the government as a condition. Mr. Park asked what help Jihan wanted. Jihan smiled before saying the conditions. A few days later, a player with the nickname Golden Light held a live stream in the Coliseum area. He was so excited when he opened a live stream by standing on the head of one of the large statues in the Coliseum. Then the young man wearing an all-gold costume jumped down from the top of the statue and introduced himself as a Golden Light streamer. Just started live streaming and suddenly someone donated 100 points to Golden Light. Instantly the man immediately exclaimed happily because a donation had arrived right when the live streaming had just started. He immediately thanked the person who gave him quite a lot of donations. While the Golden Light streamers were happy, on the other hand, there were several rookie players who really hated this man. They even pray that Golden Light will die soon and go to hell. Streamer Golden Light was indeed a player who had a handsome face and very fiery energy. But actually, he is a very evil demon. Golden Light often deliberately jumps to the lowest level to create what is referred to as deep-sea exploration content. He is a man who makes the game aside for fun, and even though it was at the lowest stats and the equipment was gold rank, so it looked very conspicuous. Golden Light was also known to really like to slaughter and bully players who were weaker and inferior to him. That's why this man has no friends and is ostracized by the other players. Then Golden Light excitedly asked the audience who would be the first victim today. He will do it quickly so that the audience does not get bored. Just as the man was looking through the players, he found Seong Jihan. Instantly Golden Light immediately approached Jihan and asked Jihan for a bit of time to do an interview with him. Seeing the Golden Light's noisy attitude made Jihan uncomfortable. He was surprised someone was live streaming before the battle started. But Jihan then remembered that there were still quite a lot of BattleTube achievements that he had yet to win. Jihan thought maybe he could increase the number of viewers by streaming too. Meanwhile, even though the Golden Light was completely ignored, he still managed to smile at the camera. But suddenly all the Golden Light viewers were excited when they saw that Jihan was also live streaming. They flocked to see Jihan's live streaming. Of course, that made Golden Light shocked and annoyed. The blonde-haired man cursed in his heart and realized that right now it was as if he was promoting Jihan. He thought that he must immediately turn Jihan into one of his content objects or he would be eliminated. Suddenly someone from the system is sending a search to all players who want to kill Jihan or make Jihan last. The reward for achieving this mission is 2,000 points. Golden Light was shocked to read the notification because he knew 1 point was equal to $1. If he could get 2,000 points, he would definitely be happy. The young man was wondering who would be willing to give such a big quest. Moreover, the spectators who were fanatical fans of the King's Sword continued to go crazy and ordered the Golden Light to carry out the mission. What's more, the system continues to notify that the prize points can continue to be increased. The Golden Light audience told him to kill Seong Jihan in the game of their love for the national hero King's Sword. In his heart, the Golden Light knew that it was all because of hatred towards Jihan, but he didn't expect people to be this bad. Golden Light was amazed because the people who watched the live stream continued to give additional points until it rose to more than 30,000 points. If this continues, Golden Light can get around 50,000 points with just one mission. The young man covered his mouth because he was so surprised by the enthusiasm of these people. Then the main system informs that all players must get ready because the game will start soon. Golden Light was shocked to hear that because the reward points the spectators had accumulated nearly reached 50,000. The man screamed in frustration seeing the numbers that were no longer increasing, even though the league would start soon. Until finally one of the spectators said that he would donate 10,000 points if Golden Light managed to kill Seong Jihan. Reading the comments made this young man excited again and immediately holding sword in an alert position. With an exaggerated expression, Golden Light said that the fervent wishes of the spectators had been accepted. Moreover, he really got a lot of value from this mission. Then he mustered all his strength and told Jihan to give up from now on, because he, the Golden Light, would end Jihan's game. As soon as the power was activated, the Golden Light rushed towards Jihan and said that he would immediately send Jihan to another world. But with one stroke of his small weapon, Jihan managed to stop the Golden Light's deadly attack. Jihan commented that the Golden Light weapon was quite sturdy and good because it didn't break even though he countered the sword with all his might. Meanwhile, Jihan only used a small mace that was rated D. The hammer was a relief from another world. The hammer was usually used on certain plants to cook herbs in a special method. The hammer will show its true strength when equipped with a kitchen knife. While Golden Light was rooted to the spot, Jihan said it would be impolite if he didn't counter Golden Light's attack. So with lightning speed, Jihan attacked Golden Light with a kitchen knife. Instantly the Golden Light screamed hysterically because of Jihan's deadly attack. The live streaming viewers who saw Jihan's sword and power started to wonder if the weapon Jihan used was the sword Kai. They also asked how it was possible for a low-class player like Jihan to have a sword's Kai weapon. Then there was a spectator who realized that the weapon Jihan used was actually a divine power item, which means Jihan is a support. The system then appeared and announced that Jihan had gotten his first kill, so he is entitled to get 100 achievement points. After that, Jihan's strength was fully charged. Calmly he said it had been a long time since he last cooked with a knife. Golden Light could see nothing, and all the light is gone. However, the darker the night, the brighter the light, this man thought. Then he appeared again at the Colosseum and said excitedly that he had been reborn for the sake of his supporters. It was clear the live stream viewers were amazed at how Golden Light had come back to life so quickly. Apparently, it was because of the resurrection item that the Golden Light had. Then Golden Light confidently told all his fans that he was careless and showed something inappropriate. But if the audience is willing to wait a bit, then he promises to give a gallant show when separating Seong Jihan's head from his body. But just as he finished speaking, Jihan was already standing right behind his body and unceremoniously killed the Golden Light. As he walked away, Jihan thought that it had been a long time since he saw someone using that resurrection item. In the future, the item was no longer usable not because of the penalty, but because it had a flaw. More importantly, Jihan thinks the league is noisier than usual this time. But apparently, it's because they have spectators now that the league this time is a real game. And their audience this time was quite an important figure, namely the elves. Jihan looked at the elves thinking they were annoying bastards, because they also played a big role in the destruction of mankind. But Jihan plans to deal with the elves later. Jihan has to deal with what's in front of him now, like an outcast or something. But when Jihan turned to look for prey, all the players ran away, saying that this was not the time to fight each other. They had to quickly run to save themselves because Seong Jihan could kill people with gold levels. Seeing them run made Jihan disappointed because he thought the hunting efficiency had dropped too low. Jihan said he even obtained a D rank relic, so he should fight more to find out whether or not there is a manifest state in his weapons master. It was at that time, the system appeared and notified about the normal quests in the league this time. The quest is Goblin Subjugation. Jihan had to subdue the goblins that had gathered around him. Jihan smiled while reading the notification. A few moments later, the goblins ran screaming for help with their choked voices. Even though the goblin could run with all its might, Jihan's speed was higher. With a single punch and slash from Jihan's two weapons, the last goblin fell. The system appears and notifies that Jihan has used knife and hammer and now the two weapons are starting to react. Jihan finally understood how to use the two weapons. The first is to hit the head and the second is to stab the opponent's heart. Since the two weapons were arranged with equipment, Jihan understood there was a sequence to use them. Jihan was happy to find the technique before the match ended, but this method takes too much time. When Jihan looked back, all the goblins had fallen. But in the end, Jihan realized that this battle was not over, because now in front of him appears Boss Goblin, who has a very large body. The system appears and informs that the Boss Goblin is not like other goblins, which are 1 meter tall. Goblin bosses can reach 3 meters in height and possess extraordinary intelligence and physical strength. Goblin bosses can also use amazing stats. Annoyed because the notification from the system was too long, Jihan without much ado immediately hit the giant goblin monster until it fell. Then Jihan said after all that monster was just a goblin with a bigger body in Jihan's eyes. After the monster fell, Jihan immediately ended it with just 1 strike. The system immediately popped up and announced that Jihan's weapon set rank had decreased from D rank to E rank. Seeing the notification, Jihan thought he could still obtain the divine power of the two weapons once more, and as Jihan suspected, he needed to kill other players to go bigger. Unfortunately, they had all run away from Jihan far enough. Jihan realized this would be even more tiring, but it couldn't be helped if they didn't want to come to him until the end, so Jihan immediately rolled up his sleeves and thought about approaching them with full force. Seeing Jihan's increasingly terrifying aura, the audience from the live stream started to get excited. They agreed that this time Jihan looked really scary when he was serious. Among the people watching the live stream, there was also a young man watching from an apartment in Gangnam, Seoul. He shouted in annoyance seeing how Jihan was acting from inside the computer screen. Apparently, he was the true figure of the golden light. This young man was excited when he saw the replay of how he was defeated by Jihan. According to him, Jihan's power is unreasonable. According to his estimation after seeing Jihan's battle with the goblins who were average level 35, it was ridiculous for a rookie like those who were only level 25 to be able to defeat level 35 monsters. This young man suspected Jihan had hacked into the system somehow. Just as this young man was in despair and put his head on the table, he heard a scream from within the computer screen. Now he saw how Jihan slaughtered other players. Golden Light was immediately stunned to see for himself how Jihan slaughtered 4 players instantly with just 1 strike. In this way, Jihan can get double kills faster. Just like Golden Light, the people who watched Jihan's live stream were amazed to see for themselves how the young man could finish off several opponents at once with just 1 strike. Until finally there were 2 more players left in the Colosseum arena. The warrior immediately asked the bald man behind him to give him a buff so he could survive Jihan's attacks because it was impossible for them to fight against Jihan. But confused, the bald man couldn't get anything out. The warrior immediately attacked Jihan by raining down arrows, but all of the arrows were easily removed by Jihan. Long story short, the 2 players lost at Jihan's hands. The entire live streaming audience hated the comment column with excitement seeing how Jihan performed when he fought. During a short break, Jihan suddenly gets a notification from the system about an epic quest, namely a special mission with a reward of 50,000 achievement points. The quest is to find the Shadow Queen among the audience in the Colosseum, then provoke the Shadow Queen to show herself. Jihan realized that this battle was not over yet. He realized he needed a big win, but Jihan was surprised to find an epic quest appeared in the Rookie League. Moreover, the epic quest is related to the constellations. Constellations were absolute beings that represented the stars and godlike beings of the BattleNet. Jihan knew this mission would lead to sponsors, and it will be possible for players to gain strength that cannot be obtained easily if they successfully complete this mission. Jihan knew this was a rare opportunity that usually appeared after reaching at least diamond rank, so Jihan should not waste the opportunity in front of him. Jihan thought he had to finish this mission no matter what. Jihan knew in his mind, if he manages to interest at least one constellation, then the other constellations will be attracted to him as well. But how am I supposed to find that constellation among the elves who are currently glaring at him? How will Jihan find the location of the Shadow Queen? The achievement that Seong Jihan got this time at the Colosseum reached 10 kills. In that country, this was the first time someone had accomplished this since Seong, and this news started spreading through various chat communities and social media. As a result, Jihan's stream at that time managed to reach 10,000 subscribers, and the number of direct viewers reached more than 4,000 people. The King Sword's fan club that had hoped that Seong Jihan would fail in the end helped him instead. In the chat room, people started talking about the King Sword fan club, which no longer made a sound against Jihan. They all suggested that the fan club should open their eyes and stop bothering Jihan. So now all the hatred was directed at the Golden Light, because the young man kept making negative comments about Jihan. But the Golden Light didn't care about that damn social media at all. He thought at this point there was nothing he could do, but he started to realize his admiration for Jihan and would become Jihan's fan. Golden Light continued to cheer for his new god Jihan. This Golden Light streamer even dreamed of becoming an editor for Seong Jihan, and shouted that he would make Jihan the star of the battle tube. Of course, Jihan's own opinion has not been considered in this matter. Meanwhile, at his apartment, Jihan is currently chatting with his niece, Sa. The girl was stunned to see the replay of Jihan's fight. She asked the uncle since when did Jihan become so strong. Sa comments that other people call this sad, but according to Sa, this is just sad. But Jihan thinks that the battle world is very cold. Then Sa asks why the uncle is blocking the donation, because it seems like a lot of people want to donate. Jihan immediately opened the hologram screen and said that he just forgot to set it up separately. While Jihan is rearranging, Sa suggests that his uncle increase the minimum donation amount. Jihan is surprised to hear that, so Sa explains that this way people can donate whenever they want and the donation notifications don't keep ringing. Because if it's like that, it will be difficult for Jihan to focus on the game. Jihan said that his nephew's suggestion was correct, so he wondered if should he manage to reach around 10,000 points. Hearing this, Sa was shocked and said the nominal was too high. Sa then looked seriously thinking about this. While Sa was thinking about donations, Jihan seemed to be seriously thinking about the epic quest he had received. However, he thought about the quest seriously. He couldn't find a way to find out where Queen Shadow was in the crowd of elves. While Jihan was deep in his complicated thoughts, suddenly Sa asked if he could help with something. Sa says that her uncle always makes that expression when things aren't going well, so he advised his uncle to let out all the pain in his chest when he was with Sa. Seeing and hearing his nephew's expression made Jihan smile with relief. Jihan thought that even if the niece imitated her mother, namely Jihan's older sister, the girl had imitated too much to look so much like her older sister. So because he felt so comfortable with Sa, Jihan started telling him that he had a task to find the Queen's Shadow in the Colosseum. Sa is surprised and asks who is the Queen of Shadows. Jihan explained that he also didn't know specifically who Queen Shadow was, besides the information that he was somewhere in the audience. Sa thinks it's a tricky mission, but the girl said that she would slowly watch all the replays and help Jihan look for anything suspicious. Jihan replied he would wait as he walked into the room. When he got to his room, this young man felt guilty for letting Sa look for Queen Shadow, because he thinks it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. But then Jihan blocked his breath and thought that it didn't matter, because Sa is so special. After all, it was Sa's wish, so Jihan just needs to thank him for the help. Then Jihan opened the hologram screen and said since he has extra free time, should he start solving problems that have been postponed. The system appears and asks if Jihan wants to add an extra class. Jihan has earned an additional class slot after purchasing using all the achievement points he has accumulated so far. Now Jihan can get an extra job, and the extra job that Jihan wants to add is Mage. Immediately Jihan's whole body was surrounded by purple light, and the system explained that Jihan had successfully changed class to Mage. Jihan could feel a new flow of power in his heart, and it was a different sensation from divine power. Jihan then asked himself if should he try the technique now. The reason why he chose Mage after selecting support was because of a unique stat that could only be obtained after getting both of these stats. Jihan immediately held his right wrist and concentrated on exerting all his strength on the wrist. It didn't take long for a large energy called a force to flow and center right in Jihan's palm. Jihan remembered before he was reborn, that day he sat next to Master Baron and listened to his drunken rambles. At first, Jihan was annoyed because the Baron Master kept telling the same thing. When Master Baron was drunk, he would sometimes tell stories that he had been harboring in his heart. But one day he told something very different from before. The Master Baron suddenly said that maybe they could fuse perfectly like the time he managed to get his two extraordinary powers. The Master Baron shows Jihan that he can move a wine bottle with his powers. Seeing Jihan confused by his words, Master Baron then explained that force is a stat that appears when magical power and divine power combine competently and perfectly. Of course, it's not easy and other people will never be able to try it, because the only player who has two classes is the Baron Master. He also said that Force is a power that can only be monopolized by himself who has two status windows. Force was an SSS rank gift that the Master Baron was so proud of. Jihan then asked if that was the only condition needed to be able to master the Force. Master Baron replied, aside from the fact that divine power must be at least level 10. That's true. Then Jihan asked again, did he, who was not an American, have the right to know this secret information? Master Baron answered confidently that Jihan may know because even though Jihan knows, the only person who can get two classes is only the Baron Master. So according to Master Baron, it doesn't matter if other people find out about it. While the Master Baron was boasting, Jihan could only admit it as the truth at that moment. This is the extraordinary power to conquer space. The power can only be obtained by the Master Baron. But not anymore. In his hands, Jihan was trying to control that power, because he had also obtained the qualifications to try it himself. Jihan admitted that it was an ability that made the Baron Master who was previously messy in control and use manage to reach rank 1. Although difficult to control, Jihan is determined to gain that strength to prepare himself for the things that are to come. So Jihan was determined to do it no matter what. Right now Jihan was trying to get the divine power from his head into his hands and sent out the magic power flowing out of his heart and converging it. So that no power comes out of his hands, Jihan has to concentrate all his focus. Jihan loses focus thinking he has succeeded, and he is suddenly thrown into the door by the force. As soon as he got up again, and felt the pain in his head had lessened, Jihan thought that he was wrong. This was not a power he could withstand with just the strength he had now. Jihan thought he couldn't understand the exact sensation of the power. Jihan leaned his head against the door wondering if he should experiment again after increasing his magic power. After failing once, Jihan found out he had almost drained all of his magic power. This young man wondered if he could combine all that power in his hand at once. Jihan thought he couldn't forcibly endure the power that was already released. But what if he kept that power within his body? Jihan then refocused on storing that power within his body. Jihan tried to take the divine power that came from the upper elixir field and combine it with the magic power that had settled in the middle elixir field. Then bring those two great powers, because the two powers cannot be mixed into the lower elixir field. So the test must try to restrain it by using martial power. Jihan was finally able to unite all of these forces in a circle of power. Jihan felt that this was a perfect formation that didn't consume a single power. And after Jihan mixed them all like this, Jihan suddenly screamed because he felt an overflow of energy from within his body. The system appeared and announced that Jihan was integrating 3 elixirs at once. The system kept warning of danger because Jihan had reached the stage of strength that surpassed that of a player. So Jihan kept screaming in pain. Even Seong, who was studying while listening to music in her room, was shocked and called her uncle softly. The combination of the 3 elixir realms meant that Jihan wanted to combine divine power, magic, and martial power all at once. But the conditions needed to combine the 3 elixir realms were very heavy. Perfect control is required over the 3 forces of a different nature, and at least it takes more than 100 energy for each stat. Jihan continued to feel excruciating pain as the 3 energies clashed within his body. If one were to get too far from the state of accumulating 100 energy, then they could lose their life. Seong, who heard screams getting clearer from her uncle's room, ran faster. The girl looked very worried, but when the door was opened, nothing happened in the uncle's room. Finally, Seong tries to compress her uncle with ice water. Seong looks in disbelief when Jihan says he screamed because he has a headache. So curtly the girl asked how the headache in her uncle's head could just disappear. Jihan casually replied that he did not understand the performance of the human body. At this point, Seong is upset, but she seems to be wiping away her tears. Seong says she's really worried something bad will happen to her uncle. Seeing his niece sad makes Jihan realize that he is not wise, which makes Seong sad. Seong asks again if his uncle is getting better. With a sincere smile, Jihan replied that he was getting better and apologized to Seong for making the girl worry to the point of crying like now. Seong wipes away her tears and hits her uncle's stomach saying he's okay. Then Seong walked out of her uncle's room again, saying that she wanted to go back to look for the queen's shadow. When Seong left, Jihan thought he should never show his weak side to Seong again so that the girl wouldn't be sad. Jihan then thought that the combination of the 3 elixir realms failed and he felt that he lacked experience. But he wasn't a complete failure. Jihan squeezed the towel that was in the container quite far from him and smiled while controlling the towel from a distance. Jihan was happy because he managed to get the power he wanted. The system appeared and announced that divine power and magic power had been integrated and replaced by unique stat powers. Jihan understood now that he failed in the unification of the elixir field. But he managed to combine divine power and magic power, which allowed him to obtain the force. While staring at the hologram screen he was holding, Jihan realized something new. Jihan was shocked to see the martial power and force of various levels. So when Jihan raised his martial power level, his force level immediately rose too. Jihan was stunned to see that and thought that force was endless. Jihan smiled and thought he could rise to this high level with just force. He became curious how great the combination of the 3 elixir fields was. But Jihan had to leave this thought first, because if he dared to try fusion again at his current level, he would probably die. Because now that Jihan had also gotten the class skills he wanted, Jihan started to think about using mage. So Jihan immediately called fire, and immediately a small fire appeared right in front of Jihan's hand. This made Jihan smile even wider and comment about how cute the fire was. The night was already late, and Jihan immediately rested. The next day, Jihan woke up to be greeted by a system notification saying that Jihan's divine power had increased to 10 points. From now on, Jihan can only absorb divine power from a relic that is rank C or higher. Last night, Jihan absorbed divine power from the 2 otherworldly objects that were currently by his side. He hoped that this opportunity would work, but sadly it didn't, even though those were all items he bought with points. Jihan then walked out of the room asking if Seong was awake. He tries to call Saya but there's no answer. As soon as Jihan's feet stepped into the living room, he was surprised to see Saya sitting on the living room bench with wide-eye bags. Saya immediately greeted her uncle who had just woken up. Seeing his niece's lethargic condition, Jihan asked if Saya kept watching the video awake all night. Saya replies casually that she kept looking until she didn't realize it was already morning. Hearing this, Jihan felt bad and asked his nephew not to push himself too hard. But Saya smiles and proudly says she found something. Saya points out that two elves seem to have high levels, but one figure has a dark body. According to Saya, between the two figures sitting on the throne, the black elf fits the title Queen Shadow more. Jihan thinks that Saya's conclusion makes sense. He also praised the girl's hard work, even though in his heart, Jihan thought that Queen Shadow was not that easy to find. Saya says that she will start checking videos from abroad tomorrow. Jihan commented that Saya looks professional in editing videos. Jihan also asked if she knew how to edit videos. Saya casually answers that she often makes videos about her father. That's why she can edit videos. Jihan was even more surprised to hear that. He stared at Sejin's shattered photo thinking how cruel that man was to leave a daughter as great as Saya. 2 days earlier, Mr. Park Yoon-sik came to their house and said that he knew the woman who had made the Sword King leave. Jihan and Saya were shocked to hear that. Jihan asks who is that girl. Mr. Park Yoon-sik replied that the woman's name was Ito Shizuru, a woman who owns SSS rank beauty. Jihan and Saya were immediately shocked to hear that. Jihan immediately asked if that meant Sejin might have fallen because of that woman's ability. Mr. Park answered honestly that he believed that was what happened. Jihan, who was hearing this for the first time even after being resurrected, was still shocked. But suddenly Mr. Park asked Jihan to be more careful, because it was said that women's beauty was predicted to exceed mind control and even be at the level of being able to reorder one's thoughts. Mr. Park also said that there were similar cases in the past of prospects in their country suddenly moving to Japan. If that gift had restrictions on its usage, then there would be no telling when that woman would appear to take on the powerful and the Korean side. Currently, Jihan was standing in front of the apartment window and kept looking for Ito Shizuru's beauty, but he couldn't find any information. Jihan thought that Japan had closed all access to information about that person. Now Jihan feels he has no other choice but to heed Mr. Park's warning to be careful. Jihan also had to start making preparations just in case, because if indeed what Mr. Park said was true, that person would have started to move. And sure enough, currently, there is an exclusive plane from Japan that will soon land in Korea. By this time, Saya is tidy and asks her uncle to hurry up. Jihan has also appeared in a neat suit complete with neatly combed hair. Jihan said it was time to welcome guests. While in the elevator, Jihan asks Saya not to be nervous, but the girl honestly said that she was a little shaken because this was her first time appearing in public since her father was working. Jihan advised Saya to just be confident like on broadcast. The youth said they had done nothing wrong, so there was no reason or need for them to be nervous. Saya smiled and confirmed her uncle's words. Finally, the lift stopped and they arrived at the lobby. A man in a neat suit greeted them. The grown man said he had prepared everything Jihan had asked for, so he said that they could start now. Jihan smiled at the person and thanked him. The man, who was none other than Mr. Park Yoon-sik, said that at first he was confused about the request that Jihan wanted at that time. Request for auction of the Sword King's collectibles. But now Mr. Park slightly understood Jihan's intention from this auction. That is to lure the Japanese. Jihan confirmed this. That's why the items being auctioned were also chosen to suit that purpose. The item being auctioned was Yoon Sejin's battle connector as well as the battle data stored in it. The battle data of the king's sword stored inside must have caught their attention, so Japan will move to take it. And if according to Jihan's scenario, the person in question might soon come by himself. Whether that person was Yoon Sejin himself or not, everyone would have no choice but to face the statement and accept it through this opportunity. Seeing how Jihan spoke, Mr. Park Yoon-sik thought that this one player had a mature plan for the future, as if Jihan saw that future directly. Jihan continued that this was his last chance to influence public opinion. Suddenly a woman's scream was heard calling Saya's name. She asked Saya to stop and listen to what she said. He couldn't get close to Saya and Seong Jihan because he was held back by security. But the woman kept insisting, saying that she is Saya's family and they are still in touch. The ones who called Saya were her paternal aunt and uncle. The aunt asks if Saya is crazy to want to sell such a valuable property. The aunt even accused Jihan of using the naive Saya to sell all the stuff. The woman also accused Jihan of being a fraud because she dared to sell other people's important items. Hearing that her uncle, Jihan, keeps getting accused, Saya gets annoyed and says to her aunt who is she calling a fraud, even though his aunt herself was the one who profited from her father's name to commit a massive fraud before being expelled. Saya firmly says there's a limit to how much one can look down on another person. So Saya asks if she is so stupid and lowly to her aunt, so that she can't make up her mind. Seong also boldly admits that she knows the ulterior motives of her aunt and uncle in trying to get their share of her father's wealth. Hearing that from a teenage girl made the aunt even more furious. She rails at Seong and accuses her of growing up to be a delinquent. But Seong ignored the woman's words and continued to say that all of her property and wealth left by her father belonged to Seong herself. So even those aunts and uncles had no right to dispute his decision. So Seong asks the guards to shoo them away because the girl no longer thinks she has anything to do with them. Then gracefully Seong walked away from her aunt's presence along with Jihan. Seeing Seong's attitude amazed Jihan and recognized him as a cool person today. Seong is proud to say that it's true because she always does everything with totality. Mr. Park Yoon-sik finally opened the meeting door while saying that they had finally arrived at the auction venue. As soon as the door was opened, the media crew immediately became excited and bombarded Jihan and Seong with various questions. Don't miss the unrelenting camera shots of the two of them. The reporters asked why Jihan allowed overseas groups to participate in this auction. They pressed Jihan to answer whether there was outside pressure to donate to Sword Palace. So incessantly they asked, and so intensely the camera glare made Jihan and Seong uncomfortable. So Jihan secretly uses his force skills to destroy all the camera lenses of the journalists. Instantly everyone fell silent when the journalists began to shut up, realizing their cameras were broken together. Jihan, who was already standing on the podium, said with a firm face that this was an auction, not a press conference. So Jihan expected more silence. Then Jihan opened the auction by explaining what items he wanted to sell. The first item to be sold is a gaming chair that has a 99% pain reduction connector. The chair was once used by the Sword's King, Yoon Sejin, so the battle data was stored neatly. The second item is data that has been collected from an analysis of the top best players in Korea and East Asia. Jihan added that the data that the King Swords had collected was very valuable. And because the Korea-Japan match is in sight, the analysis of this game is very valuable. Jihan was sure in his heart that they would not miss a single thing from player analysis data that would not be obtained from anywhere else. Among the entire audience that came, a fat man raised his hand and introduced himself as the recruiting team, Take to Kazuo. And behind him, a bodyguard similar to Yoon Sejin stood with sharp eyes. Mr. Take to Kazuo immediately offered 5 billion yen. But he asked for a condition to speak privately with Yoon Seong. Hearing that, everyone who came was stunned, including Seong. But Jihan calmly walked up to the fat man and said that the man's request was too complicated, and if the man had a business, it had to be done right there, right now. With a cold face, Jihan said that the current situation was not the right time to have a private meeting. Of all the cities, Japan should know about this the most. Instead of feeling embarrassed or awkward, the fat man named Taekta said that Jihan scared him with his cold attitude, even though he was undoubtedly a guest participating in that auction. So he asked not to be needed coldly. With a sly look in his eyes, Taekta said if Jihan kept pushing him, then someone might have to intervene. Right after Mr. Taekta spoke, the bodyguard came forward and immediately raised his sword in front of Jihan's neck. The fat man said that his bodyguard might not be on the level of a sword king, but he was still an excellent player. Mr. Taekta also said that there was no hidden meaning behind his words, but he asked Jihan to be careful. Seeing the figure in front of him made Jihan even more annoyed instead of scared. He was annoyed because the figure of Mr. Taekta's personal bodyguard girl was very similar to Yoon Sejin. Everything happened quickly in front of everyone, when a shadow class figure put his katana on Jihan's neck. The man drew his sword, so with one punch to the face, Jihan subdued the man without further ado. When the bodyguard was preparing to draw his sword to fight back against Jihan, Jihan quickly tapped his shoulder and said that this auction was broadcast live on the Battle.net streaming. Jihan asked the woman if she planned to draw her gun in front of everyone. Mr. Taekta immediately protected his bodyguard and said that his bodyguard had gone too far. So the fat man bowed several times to apologize on the spot to his bodyguard. Then suddenly Mr. Taekta said that he would pay 35 billion if he had a private meeting, and he wanted to hear the answer to that proposal from Yoon Seong. Mr. Taekta said that the one who received the inheritance was his daughter, Yoon Seong. Then the real recipient of the auction is Seong. So Mr. Taekta approached Seong and asked her if she would accept the personal proposal. And isn't Yoon Seong curious about how her father is doing? With a confident smile, the fat man said that Seong could ask anything because he had all the information about Yoon Sejin. But when Mr. Taekta asked what Seong's answer would be, the girl confidently answered that she didn't want to accept Mr. Taekta's offer. The fat man panicked and questioned Seong's answer. But once again, the girl surnamed Yoon calmly answered as her uncle had said, Master Taekta's proposal was too suspicious, and she also doesn't want to know how her father is doing. If the only way to find out how his father is through a deal, Seong shouldn't want to know. Mr. Taekta was surprised to hear Seong's words. Plus, the girl said that she was underage and Jihan was her guardian. so she will do whatever Jihan says. The audience who came to the auction could breathe a sigh of relief hearing Seong's answer. They were worried that those goods would be taken by the Japanese as well. Finally, Mr. Takeda said that he had expected Seong to refuse, so he couldn't do anything, but he will still pay $50 billion. Then the belly man explained that a private meeting wasn't actually in the plan, it was a self-added option. Hearing Master Takeda's words made Jihan even more alert. He did not stop staring at the fat man with sharp eyes. He was worried that Takeda was tricking them. Slowly, Master Takeda took out a letter from his pocket and said that before he accepts the offer to pay $50 billion, he must hand over a letter from the Swords King. Seong was surprised to see a letter with Ito Ruhei's name on it. But slowly we still received the letter from his father. After handing over the letter, Master Takeda approached Jihan and said that he had thought he would get Sword King easily. He also wondered if Koreans didn't have that kind of money. He was shocked that this auction was over quickly. Every word that Mr. Takeda said annoyed Jihan and the guests absurdly, but they have to hold back their anger considering this event is broadcast live. While staring at Master Takeda full of anger, Jihan remembers well before he was reincarnated, and back in time, the American government forbids Master Takeda from entering their country, because the fat man managed to recruit players from other countries so easily that people called him Japan Calamity or Disaster from Japan. Jihan suspects that Mr. Takeda is related to players who use gift beauty to recruit these people. With a sly smile, Mr. Takeda asked Jihan for a business agreement letter. With a heavy heart, Jihan replied that he understood. Jihan knew the fat man in front of him had to watch out, but the atmosphere to be faced at this time was very bad. Jihan was a little confused because the auction ended too soon. It was as if the result had been prearranged. If the atmosphere continues like this, public opinion will turn against Jihan and Seong. While the guests were busy grumbling, Jihan was increasingly frantic to find a turning point for this problem. It was at that moment, suddenly Seong climbed onto the podium and read out the letter she received from her father. The letter read Yoon Sejin heard that Seong would donate Swords Palace. He didn't understand why Yoon Seong made such a decision, but he thought it was too bad, because that house is the last inheritance that Yoon Sejin will give to Seong. The letter was written, and Yoon Sejin hoped that Seong would use the inheritance wisely. Then with that letter, the relationship between them as father and son ended. So Seong doesn't need to expect anything more. That's the content of a cruel letter sent by a father to his daughter. Seong even still tries to keep smiling in front of everyone even though her tears have run down her face. Even in the face of people looking at her with pitying eyes, Seong tries to stay strong by making it clear that the letter was handwritten by her father. Jihan was getting angry when he heard that. Jihan admits in his heart that from the start he never liked Yoon Sejin. But for Seong, he is a cool and reliable father figure. But now, in front of his own eyes, Sejin has hammered the last nail so sharp into Seong, his daughter so cruelly. It was clear Jihan hated him even more. Then in front of everyone, Seong tore up the letter and asked Master Takeda to tell Master Ito Ruhei that she had received the last inheritance well, and she would be happy to cut ties with Ito Ruhei. But with a sad face, Seong says that she just remembered that if she rips it like that, then she'll be a bother to the person in charge of cleaning the room. Finally, Jihan showed his extraordinary strength. He said he would clean up the unimportant letter for Seong. With his strength, Jihan collects all the pieces of paper and then burns them with fire. Instantly, everyone in the room who saw Jihan's ability was stunned. They asked each other, isn't Jihan support or mages? But they later realized that Jihan had fighting abilities similar to a warrior's, divine power, even magic power. Mr. Takeda, who saw Jihan's abilities, as well as gossip about Jihan from the people around him, immediately wanted Jihan to join his guild. But he was left out because a group of people took quick steps to approach Jihan and asked him to join their guild. Jihan was overwhelmed and asked everyone to calm down because it would be too troublesome if everyone came suddenly. While Jihan was busy dealing with these people, Seong called out to him in a low voice. Jihan only looked back a little and asked his nephew to come back first because he was busy right now. But when Seong said with a heavy breath that her head hurt, Jihan was immediately taken aback because Seong immediately fainted right in front of him. Jihan immediately approached Seong and asked the girl to open her eyes. Jihan looked panicked as he supported Seong's weak body. But suddenly the girl pulled Jihan's collar and whispered very softly that he was currently acting. The girl blinked one eye to signal to Jihan that she understood that uncle was in trouble and needed his help. Hearing this, Jihan could breathe a sigh of relief. However, the guests who had wanted to invite Jihan to join their guild had to swallow disappointment, because the situation made it impossible for them to recruit Jihan into their guild. Meanwhile, Jihan smiled at Seong's attitude and thought the girl looked a lot like her sister. Then Jihan stood up and apologized to everyone because he had to stop the event now. His nephew is not in good condition, so he needs rest. Jihan also held Seong's hand and led him to walk slowly out through the side door. Before actually leaving the auction room, there was one person who insisted on calling Jihan's name. It was Master Taekda. The fat man asked Jihan to wait a moment. He apologized if his presence was a distraction. Then holding up the business card, Mr. Taekda said that he had formally invited Jihan to his place to better introduce himself. So he asked if Jihan could contact him later. Immediately Jihan took Mr. Taekda's business card with his force power and said that Mr. Taekda would not make him laugh with his offer. Then Jihan destroyed the fat man's business card in response to Mr. Taekda's offer. The look in Jihan's unfriendly eyes proved that he was rejecting Mr. Taekda's offer. After Jihan left, Mr. Taekda still looked down at his place while looking at the fragments of the business card that had been destroyed. Instead of being angry, the fat man thought Jihan was the best player. According to him, Jihan's strength is truly extraordinary, because before this, Mr. Taekda had never seen such power capable of tearing a small business card to shreds. That strength alone was enough to make Jihan so precious. Even though Jihan is still a bronze player, he is still a star worth waiting for. That's the opinion of Mr. Taekda. Meanwhile, Jihan and Seiya immediately high-fived as soon as they left the auction room. Jihan thought that his nephew's acting was really like an artist, so Jihan himself was almost fooled. Seiya smiles confidently and asks if he's ever done anything bad. Suddenly there is a notification from the system that says that Jihan has one unread message. Then when it was opened, it turned out that there was a fan who gave Jihan 10,000 points for free. The figure with the nickname Take-chan asked to meet Jihan in person. If Jihan is willing, then he will give more points again. Seiya and Jihan are surprised to see the donation from that person. They seem to see clearly that Take-chan just wanted to make fun of them, so Jihan thought of just blocking it. As they were walking down the hall to go home, suddenly there was a charming lady who wanted to introduce herself very politely to them. It was the director of the 3rd division of the twin guilds, Lee Haeun. Politely and gracefully, Lee Haeun said that she came directly to that place because she wanted to meet Jihan. But before that, the girl surnamed Lee apologized if her arrival was too sudden. Instead of welcoming the girl kindly, Jihan instead said that outsiders shouldn't enter this area carelessly. So how did Lee Haeun end up in this area? Jihan thought this girl's voice was very familiar. He wondered if he had ever met this girl before. Lee Haeun replied that she had quite a deep relationship with the administration office of South Korea's BattleNet, so she only used a bit of her connections to get into the area. Lee Haeun confidently said that she was quite famous within her guild because she had many connections. Hearing this girl's way of speaking made Jihan even more certain that he had met Lee Haeun before. When Lee Haeun with an embarrassed face said that she was a fan of Jihan, this young man suddenly realized the figure of the masked woman in his life before being reborn. Jihan froze when he realized that the woman in front of him must be the masked figure from the past. When Jihan was lost in thought, Seiya was even surprised to see his uncle's attitude. He was so stunned when he saw Lee Haeun. The teenage girl thought that her uncle thought Lee Haeun must be a very pretty girl. Jihan suddenly said, "When the world is filled with various possibilities, it is difficult to ignore them." That's a quote from Dostoevsky, one of the world's greatest novelists who is more famous as a gambling addict. Jihan immediately asked Lee Haeun if the girl liked this quote. Gaeyoung suddenly acted quickly by blocking Lee Haeun's body and asking the old man to back off. Gaeyoung immediately asked with a galactic face, "What exactly is this, Jihan? How could he know Lee Haeun's motto?" Gaeyoung said out loud that only a few people knew that Lee Haeun was a serious gambling addict. So how could an outsider like Jihan know about that? Seeing the attitude of Lee Haeun's bodyguard, Jihan smiled and became even more convinced that this woman in front of him was undoubtedly America's first manager who had the nickname Zero. Jihan remembered well that woman was the only Korean besides him in America. The woman was an addict who was obsessed with alcohol and gambling. But with his talent nurturing players, he was able to become the guild master of the reserve team. Usually nurturing abilities are gifts that only increase the experience others receive, but after the Muslim tutorial ended, Zero was able to increase other things like stats and gifts. S-rank nurturing can increase the growth of the targeted player's experience stats to get a gift. And someone who has the best nurturing gift is she, Zero. Jihan thought the Twin Star Guild is amazing because they can have the Plum Blossom Sword and Zero at the same time. This made Jihan smile a little. Jihan then said that he saw that quote in one of his streams. It was the most memorable quote he has ever received from one of his fans. So Jihan deliberately said that in case Lee Haeun was his fan. Jihan did not forget to apologize for surprising them. Gaeyoung, who was embarrassed, asked Lee Haeun if the master often sent comments while watching streaming. To get rid of the awkwardness and misunderstanding, Lee Haeun cleared her throat and said that she didn't feel a bit bad to be called a gambling addict, but she thought it was okay to start a conversation in such a relaxed atmosphere. In his heart, Jihan not only accused the girl in front of him of being an addict, but according to him, Lee Haeun was indeed a gambling addict. Thinking about this makes Jihan smile, and Seiya is more and more convinced that her uncle likes Lee Haeun. Lee Haeun added that she didn't know why, but she had a feeling they would see each other often. So Lee Haeun took out her cell phone and handed it to Jihan while saying that the Twin Star Guild wanted Jihan. Seeing the interaction of the two lovebirds in front of him made Saya even more radiant because she was sure that the woman surnamed Lee in front of them also liked her uncle. At a time like this, Lee Hae-in felt confident and very sexy. Lee Hae-in hoped in her heart that Gaeong would pay attention to the way she balances personal and business matters. This girl hopes her stiff bodyguard learns how to handle men from her. Lee Hae-in confidently thought that she was a teacher experienced in business dealings and handling men. But suddenly Jihan slowly apologized because she still couldn't find his phone number. This of course made Lee Hae-in and Gaeong absurdly surprised. Jihan even asked Saya what's her phone number. Of course, the teenage girl was also shocked and confused to hear the ridiculous reasons her uncle revealed. Saya even thinks that her uncle is playing hard to get tactics, so the girl tried to support her uncle by pretending to be dizzy and about to faint again. Jihan also thought that his nephew might want to rest soon, so Jihan with a heavy heart said that he had to go back now because his nephew's condition was not very good. But Jihan added that if Lee Hae-in gave him a business card then he would contact the girl later. With a still shocked face, Lee Hae-in held out a business card to Jihan. As the four of them part ways, Saya smiles along the way thinking that she won't have to worry about her uncle's romance problems anymore. Meanwhile, Lee Hae-in told Gaeong to just laugh and not hold back. Lee Hae-in was pissed off, so she was going to allow her bodyguard to laugh contentedly. But Gaeong remained shy and tried his best to hold back his laughter that was about to explode. While walking home, Saya remarks that something is unexpected. The girl didn't expect Jihan to wear her father's clothes. Jihan reluctantly said that he was forced to wear the dress because all his formal clothes no longer fit. Jihan added that there's nothing wrong with nice clothes. Saya confirms that and says excitedly that they just need to put on a good performance in front of a lot of people. But suddenly Saya said that what her uncle said just now was something very bad. Jihan was shocked and asked what his nephew meant. Saya explains that it's as if his uncle just rejected a girl by not giving a number. Saya says that playing hard to get is great, but lying and saying that not remembering his own number is really bad. Saya supports his uncle's attitude because he is used to being fast. With a face to me, Jihan said that he didn't know about it. For a moment Saya was shocked. This girl even asked Jihan several times if he seriously didn't know about this. With an innocent face, Jihan answered no. Saya is so upset that she says her uncle has dementia. Once again with an innocent face, Jihan replied that it had not happened. Finally, Jihan chose to enter the game world to return to complete the mission. This time the mission is defense. Players must defend crystals from zombie attacks. As soon as he arrived at the fortress zone near the crystal, Jihan thought he was very exhausted, because he spends a lot of time comforting and calming Saya who feels guilty for destroying his uncle's love story. Jihan sighed tiredly again as he suspected that his niece had mistakenly thought he liked Lee Hae-in. Although it is impossible for Jihan to want to be with a gambler like that. Regardless of all that, Jihan didn't expect he would meet Zero again like this. Jihan remembers that night they spent drinking alcohol at the bar. Zero keeps complaining that she lost the gamble and Diego Macid won. Jihan remembers that ever since they both lost their homeland they quickly became close friends. Happy holidays. They drink alcohol and spend time betting on games. And Zero is always serious when it comes to gambling. Jihan won because he knew Diego Macid would win. Meanwhile, Zero is annoyed because he thinks Diego is just an insect, even though Diego Macid is the owner of the God of Football gift. Ignoring the name, after all, the skill was an SSS rank gift. Even though he has lost several times, Zero still insists on starting another time, because she is sure to win. It was at this time that Jihan asked her to stop gambling. But Zero always said when this world is full of possibilities, it's hard to ignore them. Jihan said he was sick of Zero who always said that every time she is lost. Jihan also asked if the girl really didn't want to get rid of the scars on her face. Zero replies it will never, because the wound is the price that must be paid for a deal with the devil. After that, Zero asked why is Jihan so strong now? If Jihan had been strong like this since he was still in Korea then Zero's good friend wouldn't have died. Jihan became aware that apart from the fact that they were both naturalized there were many factors that were very similar between the two of them. But the most similar part between them is self-loathing. Right at that moment Zero kept cursing herself and said that she wasn't the one who had the right to say those things because I was the bad person here. They are both trapped with guilt and self-loathing for not being able to protect the people who are precious to them. So that's how Jihan and Zero got along with each other. Now, Jihan is back in the fort, where he is live streaming before starting the league. The audience was surprised to see Jihan come wearing such a formal suit. They suspect Jihan came after the auction, until finally the audience realized that Jihan was holding a large sword in his right hand. They were amazed how Jihan could get such a cool sword when before he only used a kitchen knife. That weapon was the Urk Priest's execution sword, an exclusive sword that has a rank of C and is usually used by Urk Priests when they offer sacrifices on altars to the gods. Jihan touched the blade of the sword and thought why it was so cheap for a C-rank relief. It turned out that there was a reason, namely that the sword was too big and heavy to be wielded by a normal person. Jihan tried to swing the sword in all directions and realized that the weight of the weapon was not much for him. The spectators who saw Jihan's ability to use the sword suspected that Jihan should be in the warrior class. Many viewers began to question Jihan's true class. They want Jihan to show his status window. After he finished trying out the large sword, Jihan stabbed the sword into the ground thinking there were more people now, and some of them started asking for something. Jihan knows he has reached 20,000 subscribers, but according to him, it is still too early to reveal the status of windows. Even so, Jihan knew he couldn't ignore his supporters. Jihan then greeted all of his spectators and said that he knew many people were curious about his status windows, so he promised to show them once he reached 200,000 subscribers. Immediately many viewers were disappointed with Jihan's announcement, because the promise that Jihan made was too far away. So Jihan started to look serious and said that he would make one more announcement. After this league, if he didn't become number 1, then he would reveal his status window right then and there. Instantly, the live streaming viewers were even more curious whether Jihan could maintain his position. Because he felt that the announcement was enough, Jihan returned to wait for the arrival of his team members. When the 3 lights that signaled the appearance of the other 3 players came and disappeared instantly, Jihan's expression turned completely shocked. He didn't expect the 3 people in front of him to be in the same place as him. Those 3 people were Golden Light, the mage that Jihan had killed, and most shockingly, Diego Macid. As usual, Golden Light was the most excited person, and he looked so happy when he met Jihan again, while the mage looked still angry and annoyed at Jihan. As for Diego, he looks busy playing the ball. Jihan remembered well this was the first time he met Diego in person in his previous life and in this life. Jihan's audience looked displeased with Diego's presence. They think the ball player is just a useless circus clown. They all insulted Diego. Jihan knows that currently, Diego doesn't have much to show. His body was thin and his beard was messy. But Jihan then realized that there was something strange about Diego. In this team, Jihan is the support, the Golden Light is the warrior, and the Hothead is the mage, so Diego must be the archer. Here's what's weird. Jihan remembered well, in his previous life, that man was a mage. Jihan's face went pale. He wondered what exactly was going on here. While Jihan was immersed in complicated thoughts, the mage in his group still stared at Jihan with anger. This one mage really didn't expect to become Seong Jihan's teammate again. He never stopped swearing at Jihan, even if only in his heart. Last time, Jihan made him lose a lot of skills and was at the last level. Made him really not want to see Jihan again. Suddenly there was an incoming quest on the mage's hologram screen which managed to astonish him. The mage received a request from someone to destroy the crystal and stop Jihan from getting to first place. No half-hearted person is willing to pay 50,000 points if the mage wants to complete this mission. As soon as the game started, a huge explosion immediately occurred near the Jihan team tower. Apparently, it was from Diego Macid, who was desperately attacking the monsters under the ramparts using a kicked ball. After a while, Diego asked Jihan's support to give him a buff, because as an archer he needs a lot of strength. Jihan knows that in a team game, everyone has to stick to their role, and this buff skill, Jihan couldn't use before due to lack of stats. But since Jihan's divine power had risen, he would give it a try now. Jihan immediately raised his hand and set a power-up that made all of his teammates' abilities go up quickly. The Golden Light was the happiest person because he didn't expect Jihan to give them such a big buff. Now he's sure Jihan is really a support. The live streaming viewers who saw Jihan's ability to give buffs are now sure that the young man is indeed a support. But a strange support that has a big sword that is suspicious. The mage, who didn't like Jihan from the start, wondered why Jihan wanted to give buff to him too. Suddenly Jihan called the mage and asked if he would play properly now. With a little stammer then it replied that he would play correctly. In his heart the mage knew if he didn't play well Jihan would definitely throw him again. After hearing the answer from the mage, Jihan immediately jumped from the top of the fortress and said that he would leave the top to the mage and 2 other people. Seeing Jihan's goofy attitude made the mage even more annoyed. He really didn't like anything about Jihan, and he doesn't like being considered a subordinate by Jihan. The mage then remembered the high reward quest he would get if he left Jihan. Now he will no longer hesitate to leave Jihan alone. He couldn't wait to see how long Jihan could do whatever he wanted. Before landing above the crowd of zombies, Jihan released a flame in his left hand and realized that his magic power had increased after combining and becoming a force. If Jihan added divine power to those flames, then something like a zombie aggregation would be nothing to him. Instantly Jihan immediately burned the crowd of zombies under him with just one strike. Then he landed with his huge sword. With just one strike of the blade, it was able to annihilate hundreds of zombies at once. Diego and the Golden Light who saw Jihan's ability from the top of the fortress were amazed. This was the first time they had seen a support class player whose attack skills were so crazy. The viewers who witnessed Jihan's abilities from the live stream were amazed. They started to wonder where this great person came from. Suddenly a blood zombie appeared who wanted to attack Jihan. But strangely, the big and terrible zombie immediately stopped as soon as he got near Jihan. This young man smiled and thought that all of this was according to his expectations. What he got was difficult, but it was well worth the effort. This is one of the new techniques that Jihan got. That is the real space controlling of force. This meant that anyone who had been caught or entered within certain limits of this technique would be restricted and controlled by the user of the technique. Most people are not aware of this formless power, but Jihan is used to it, because she was the Baron's training partner whose control was very poor compared to abilities. And after facing the power of the Baron's master many times, Jihan began to understand how force works. Jihan coated his sword with fire and then swung it to instantly get rid of the hundreds of trapped zombies with force. The current Seong Jihan was the most absolute being, because he could use divine power and magic power simultaneously. Plus he has force and martial power. Anyone at the bronze level would not be able to stop it. Initially, Jihan had succeeded in killing 200 zombies, but with his attack just now, Jihan immediately managed to kill around 1,000 zombies. Then he is entitled to a reward point of around 3,000 achievement points. Tika stopped there. Jihan used incredible speed to attack the zombies all at once. Even Jihan slides in the middle of a crowd of zombies like a rocket that immediately scorches them. Golden Light, who saw Jihan's ability, said that he couldn't believe what he was seeing now. Likewise, Diego looks very impressed with Jihan. Golden Light even said that he really wanted to see Jihan's status window. Meanwhile, the live streaming audience started laughing at the three players in Jihan's group who didn't do anything at all. Meanwhile, the mage who was standing behind the two of them looked suspiciously with a wide, hideous grin. Golden Light, who was asked by one of the live streaming viewers to see the mage, was immediately shocked by the scene before his eyes. The mage created a large flame in his right hand and then cursed as loudly as possible at Jihan. He thinks Jihan is just a piece of trash that has recently become the center of public attention. The mage also accused Jihan of seducing his own nephew. He asked him politely how much Jihan had exposed his nephew, that he was only talking about Jihan alone. The audience on the live stream was shocked at how brave the mage was. They agreed that the creature had gone so far as to invite its own death. The mage kept saying that Jihan probably treated Saya so well in a seductive sense, so that girl just wants to obey him. Jihan just kept quiet, being accused of being disgusting like that. The audience thought that this young man was so calm and mentally strong because he could survive the mage's accusations. But suddenly Jihan's eyes turned sharp, and the veins on his face stood out when he heard the mage asking what Jihan was doing with Saya. Now the audience will soon know that Jihan is not that patient. The prize of 55,000 points that the mage, Kim Jae-hyuk, will get for his secret mission to take down Jihan and destroy the crystal is the result of donations from fans of King Swords who really hate Seong Jihan. Such a big reward was enough to make Kim Jae-hyuk muster up the courage and challenge Jihan. And John knows all of that. According to Jihan, there were two reasons for Kim Jae-hyuk's change in attitude. Yes, he grew up to be someone who was suddenly full of confidence, or someone pushed him so strongly that he had this much courage. Jihan thought this young man was very troublesome because he seemed to only want to curse Jihan and then just disappear. Jihan doesn't mind if that person curses him, but if he dares to offend Saya, then Jihan won't be able to allow that. After Jihan was reincarnated and reunited with Saya, he forgot many things. But there was something he wanted so badly to forget but couldn't. That is the last moment of Saya's life. At that time, Jihan could only cry holding Saya's body, which was full of wounds and cold. Saya's head is even still wrapped in bandages because of the wounds she received from Swords King's diehard fans. At that time, Jihan had really lost his nephew who didn't know anything. Jihan screamed in anger because he couldn't do anything for Saya. From then on, Jihan told himself he would never let something like that happen again. Jihan vows to take care of Saya no matter what. He won't let anyone bother Saya again. Anger was clearly visible from Kai flowing out of Jihan's body in a very tempestuous manner. The viewers of this live stream now know how angry Jihan is. One of them agreed that offending someone by insulting their family was too much. The live streaming viewers agreed that Jihan gave punishment to Kim Jae-hyuk. Everyone will now learn what they will gain if they dare to bully Saya. When Jihan obtained the force, there was something he noticed after trying to fuse the 3 elixir fields. He could use the Nameless Divine Artist. Jihan's martial power had not yet reached 30, but for a moment he was able to imitate the technique until his whole body was full of powerful Kai flows. And Jihan could feel it closely as the power of the 3 elixir realms gathered together. Jihan could feel a sensation very similar to Nameless Divine Power. Even with this technique, Jihan can transmit electrical energy with just one stomp of his foot. If he could become one with lightning, then his footwork technique would pierce the sky like a step from thunder. Meanwhile, Kim Jae-hyuk, who was standing on top of the fort, smiled in relief after insulting Jihan. But just as he was about to destroy the crystal with his flames, Golden Light tried to stop him. Instantly the golden light was attacked by Kim Jae-hyuk with that fire magic. With a vicious face, Kim Jae-hyuk asked the golden light not to interfere or he would be the one to burn Kim Jae-hyuk first. At a critical time like this, after enduring an attack from Kim Jae-hyuk, Golden Light still managed to ask everyone to subscribe and like the video if the viewers wanted him and Jihan to survive. Kim Jae-hyuk then created several magic circles to create a large firestorm. This one evil mage really wants to finish it immediately, but when this witch shot her fire at the crystal, suddenly a ball held the fire until it was burnt. On the other side of the fort, Diego Macid was still raising his foot because it was he who had just kicked the ball to block Kim Jae-hyuk's attack. The entire audience was astonished at how well Diego was able to block that magical attack with just one ball. Diego said that he was always serious about games. He could forgive someone who messed up the game, but more than that, Kim Jae-hyuk had insulted people who helped the team and even insulted his family members. So Diego couldn't stay. He saw bad people doing bad things right in front of his eyes. Kim Jae-hyuk was furious and cursed at Diego. He was about to attack Diego when suddenly a flash of blue light landed right behind Kim Jae-hyuk with an extremely strong killing aura. With a scary face and a deep tone of voice, Jihan said that it seemed that Kim Jae-hyuk had a lot to say. This evil mage was immediately surprised to see Jihan suddenly behind him. He panicked and was confused about what to do in a situation like this. A second later, Kim Jae-hyuk started thinking about insulting Jihan again, but his mouth was immediately locked with Jihan's force skill. Jihan said honestly that he wanted to blow Kim Jae-hyuk right away, but he changed that decision and thought that he couldn't give Kim Jae-hyuk an easy death. Jihan knows that the pain will be channeled through the connector, so if he killed Kim Jae-hyuk, the only thing that would happen would be just lowering the evil mage's level. Then Jihan made Kim Jae-hyuk's body fall to his knees and touched the man's tofu while saying that he would show the true pain of this world. At a time of urgency like that, Kim Jae-hyuk still thought that Jihan was stupid, because he obviously wouldn't be able to kill Kim Jae-hyuk immediately. Kim Jae-hyuk would probably just lose his abilities like before, and he probably couldn't fall any further. In his heart, this one evil man thinks that losing gifts is indeed embarrassing, but at least he can make Jihan angry. However, he immediately regretted that thought as he felt a terrifying and painful electric current run through his body. It was at that moment that Jihan released the lock on Kim Jae-hyuk's mouth so that this evil mage screamed horribly when he felt the sensation of torture that was so real. Seeing Kim Jae-hyuk's condition did not make Jihan satisfied at all. The young man instead said with a cold face, why was Kim Jae-hyuk screaming so loudly? He hadn't even started his torture yet.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more videos like this. Leave a comment or a like to help the channel out.